I don't know if you can tell, but I definitely can tell it right here and then right here. But I'm your district wildlife biologist. And additionally to that, I am your chapter's advisor. So I'm the liaison for Texas Parks and Wildlife that covers the Heartwood chapter. So I'm technically a board member. I sit on the board committee meetings and oversee a lot of the chapter's involvement in various activities. And do lead the talking between A&M AgriLife, Master Naturalist, and Parks and Wildlife. Yes. Awesome. Oh, y'all have one for me. Look at that. I don't even need my own.
It's a challenge.
So. I don't need that guy. Well, cool. We already went over who I am. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of taxonomy, a little bit of why it's important, and a little bit of what I do, because that tends to be the question a lot of times is, you have this illustrious title of wildlife biologist, but what does that actually mean? I like to throw this graphic up because it kind of encapsulates a lot of different things that I like to think of a biologist does. So maybe I can't turn a lot. So in my mind, I got into the degrees, excuse me, and the career of wildlife conservation, wildlife management, and wildlife science to do a myriad of different things. First and foremost, Steve Irwin was my hero, as most people. Fun fact, Steve Irwin died on my birthday. So it's not a fun fact. It is not, but nonetheless, it's trivial, I suppose. But Steve Irwin was a big influence on me, as well as my upbringing. Like I mentioned, I was from a town of 200. As you can imagine, this neighborhood is more than 200. And that's my entire town. So outdoors, rural living, nature was so deeply integrated into who we were, what we did, how we did it, that anything outside of the realm of nature, doing a CPA, doing any of these other careers was just not even on an option. The thought of doing something that didn't reconnect me back to the resources I loved, I grew up with, and that I got the sense of belonging from my grandparents, my great grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my parents. It wasn't an option for me. So I decided to go and get my degree from Texas A&M in wildlife management and wildlife ecology. And then I went to Sul Ross State University. If you've never heard of it, you're in the majority. It's next to Big Bend National Park, out there on the other end of the world, as far as Texas is concerned. And got my master's in rangeland ecology and wildlife conservation and natural resource management. So very long title. It just meant I get to write a really long paper and do 4 years of study just to come and talk to you all about how I do plants. So as a wildlife biologist, my job is to be the liaison for the private landowner in my jurisdiction for the natural resources. Natural resources can be anything from deer, turkey, elk, all the way down to hummingbird gardens, to pollinator gardens, to anything in between. If it has to do with land in my counties, I should be the expert for it, and I should be the on-the-ground resource for it. So whenever it comes to what I do, a lot of times, a lot of the questions I tend to get are kind of questions of someone texting me, my cousin texted me at 4 a.m. Hey, I saw this picture of this bird on Facebook. What is this? Or I'll have a landowner call me and say, hey, found this plant. Can you tell me what it is? A lot of times it comes with I don't know, that's a blurry picture and you took a picture of your foot and not the plant. Other times it actually can be pretty useful because at certain times, these differentiating features could be the difference between something common and edible or something highly poisonous. So the idea and the ability to identify things is one of the core tenets of wildlife conservation. It's the reason why when you get a degree in wildlife ecology, they spend upwards to 20 hours teaching taxonomy and classification. I find it ironic they're having me teach something that I had to take 3 times because it was so difficult. But that's neither here nor there. So whenever people ask me things like that, those are what the common things I get. So I get a picture like the one on the left and say, hey, what plant is this? Or a picture like the one on the right. Said, I saw this flying outside of my house. What is this? Who can tell me what the guy on the left is?
Water hemlock?
Ma'am?
Water hemlock?
Water hemlock? Okay. Do we have another guess as well?
Wild carrot?
Wild carrot? I like where y'all's mind is at because that's the point I'm trying to make. How about the picture on the right?
What? Vulture?
Vulture, which kind?
Turkey.
Turkey vulture? Another guess? No other guess? Okay. So the point I tried to make here is sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. There are 2 types of vulture we have in Texas. The turkey vulture, like you mentioned, and the black vulture. The turkey vulture, the key factor is the secondary feathers have white marks. And it has a red bald head, similar to that of a tom turkey. The black vulture only has the tips of the primaries white, and it has a black head. Both are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but it is different because they behave differently. Black vultures are very aggressive, and the Fish and Wildlife Service allows depredation permits because black vultures, for ranchers, can attack and kill calves during calving season. Turkey vultures are not usually the culprits of that, but they can, but not usually. Okay. So an ID in this instance could be the difference of being on the Fed's good side or getting the correct permit. So talking about the plant, y'all were spot on with what I was trying to get. There are 2 plants that are nearly identical. One is one of the most poisonous plants we have in North America. The other is a wild foraging plant you can forage and eat. And it's perfectly fine to eat. It is poison hemlock or water hemlock and Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot. The differences tend to be very minute. In poison hemlock, in the very tip of the flower, in the middle of it, there's a dot. Versus there is not in Queen Anne's lace. Additionally, if you look at the stem, there's purple coloration on poison hemlock, water hemlock, and there are fine hairs with no purple on Queen Anne's lace. Notice I paused because I still don't remember that. It takes a lot of repetition for these to stick, but that's where this splitting hairs, this literal splitting of hairs is important. Because that could be the difference of a hospital trip in the obituary versus a neat little thing you can show a kindergarten class. You don't show that one to a kindergarten class though. Oh, you're fine. Who is this?
Yes.
Carl Linnaeus, known as the father of modern taxonomy. So taxonomy is kind of what we're talking about today. It is the literal art of splitting hairs. Semantics is important in taxonomy because it's the difference between those individual species, those families, those genuses, or in certain instances, the genetic difference between subspecies. So subspecies are species that technically can interbreed, but are disconnected for some reason or another, be it geographic, be it anthropomorphic, so some sort of human influence, but it's created 2 genetically distinct species. Okay, that is where taxonomy comes into play. It's where a lot of people get paid a lot of money and get to put their names in papers because they identify these new species. So on the left was the order of classification that he proposed back in the day. This was the original one. This is the one I still think of. This is one I was taught in college. Since then, I have one here later that adds 2 different layers to it. So just to show you the difference between when I was getting my bachelor's to now and how quickly science changes over that time. But it's the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. echelon or stair step progression. It goes from the most general. So splitting things up by kingdom. Animalia, planta, question mark, or fungi. Then it drops down each level. It becomes more and more specific based upon characteristics of that species or that organism. So, maybe not. There we go. Okay, so this is the current taxonomy hierarchy. So the two that were added since I was in college are the ones in red. Domain, which is Eukarya, Akarya, or Eukarya anarcha, I believe, which talks about bacteria and separating bacteria out on this plate. And then subfamily. Subfamily is a little bit less used than domain is, but in some instances, subfamily is used in scientific ethics. Oh, we're back on. So to do a little exercise of this, I'm going to go each step and see if you can tell me what animal I'm talking about. So who is good with Latin? One person, two people, great. Who is up to speed on your scientific names? One person, two, three-ish, four-ish, okay, maybe a handful. Perfect. What species is this? What animal is this?
Bacteria. Eukaryote. Oh,
Multi-cell.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Do we know what exact species it is yet?
Okay.
How about now?
It's an animal.
It's an animal. Fantastic. Okay. One more. Chordata. It has a spinal cord or a notochord. Next one.
It's an animal.
Mammal. Mammal produces milk, has fur, and has internal gestation and produces live young. Artiodactyla.
Fingers.
Even-toed feet. Not odd-toed. Odd-toed are hippos, horses. Even-toed are called ungulates. Cervidae. It's a deer. We know what kind of deer. Not yet. Caproline. I honestly don't know this one. This is that subfamily. I don't understand where they got this one from, but so looks are cool. Odocoleus. This one should have gave it away now. Maybe. Virginianus. So the scientific name, the abbreviated scientific name that you most often see in literature is Odocoleus virginianus, which is our white-tailed deer we have here in Texas. So if you notice, if we back up, even to this point, it could be between two different things. Especially in Texas, it could be a mule deer or a white-tailed deer. We get elsewhere in the world, it could be a black-tailed deer, mule deer, white-tailed deer. There are various different types of cervids we have in North America. And that's where the splitting hairs come into play. This is also where science gets fun because you get to really determine what makes a species unique or different. Yes, ma'am.
Can you go over it one more time? What is your card? Your time?
Yeah,
You need to know them?
not necessarily.
So EU means true. When you, in Latin, the prefix EU means true.
Okay.
So it means a true organism. In other words, it has a nucleus
Ah,
bound by a membrane.
there we go. So did y'all hear that? Yes, maybe. So perfect, perfect. So yeah, you don't necessarily need to know this. This is just to iterate the point of how taxonomy works. Okay.
So you start with the smallest.
You start with the most broad class
But
and you get more specific.
it's based on common traits.
Correct. So it's based on this deer has all of those traits. This species, the white-tailed deer, has all of those traits.
What Darka means it has a spine.
Correct.
Mammal means it has fur and what else?
So mammalia is broken down by a few different characteristics. The one we most commonly think of is spur produces milk, spur. Lord have mercy. Live babies produces milk and fur. Man,
One exception, the duck-billed platypus, is that right?
correct.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And there's a few different realms of thought there as to why it's exactly different. And that's whenever it comes into the other, I think there are 5 total characteristics of a mammal. So I think one of those 5 is where platypus is split off. But because of that, if you look at what's called a dichotomous key or a clade, that's where you see a duck-billed platypus is closer related to a traditional mammal than it is something else. But that's where those marsupials are closer to mammals than other species. So we go into taxonomy and why it's important. It's when you can really get into the weeds of, and this is where science often does get into the weeds of what exactly makes a species unique. Is it one genome difference? Is it multiple characteristics different? Or is it a combination of both? Okay, it's one of those things where historically, if you look at the grizzly bear, we had a Texas subspecies of grizzly bear. I believe the last one was extirpated around the 40s or 60s. No, maybe not. Anyway, if you get time, look up that story. It's a really cool story. That skull is in the Smithsonian. Anyway, that grizzly was identified because of skull measurements and geography as a different subspecies. But geonomically, it was not. So its genome was the same as that of the grizzly bear in the western United States. So taxonomy does take some liberties in what and how it splits things apart. But at the end of the day, some of these features that prevent immigration can substantiate a different species. So when it comes to what I mentioned earlier, a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is a way that we work through these splitting things apart. So if you look here, we kind of have our treasure map for different species. This is how we say we give a series of yes/no questions that lead you down the rabbit trail to identify the species. These yes/no questions typically are, yes, it has a certain trait, or no, it does not. And then that's how you can broadly split apart different species. Excuse me. So within that, and within how species are split apart, the rule of thumb is it's easier to lose a evolutionary adaptation than it is to gain that adaptation. And the less number of steps needed is the most likely route. So by that, I mean, if we have a step here between birds and splitting out birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians for mammals, if we have no fur and doesn't fly, that's too many steps, so it's not most likely to be the option. Or if we found 2 different things that split them, most likely it's not going to be both of those, or excuse me, most likely it's not going to be 2 steps, it's going to be both of those removed in 1 step through the evolutionary history of that head. And with that, we get into exactly what we do when we're trying to identify that. You have some questions?
Can you go back?
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
no problem.
Make a quick comment.
Yeah.
Di means 2, so it's like 2 choices.
Mhm.
Not all keys are dichotomous.
That is correct. Now, I feel in most instances, in the scientific community, that needs to be pointed out, but when I'm teaching the public, that just muddies the water. Because
Yeah,
a lot of times it's not necessary to add that much context to
Yeah. Some
to
of
it.
the keys the lay keys that I have found, but not all kinds.
Yeah.
So. I would look into this and like,
For sure, and a lot of the ones I have in my office for specifically fungi are not narcotics. Because it gets messy, really messy,
well, you're looking at my mycologist botanist, so.
absolutely. But you understand the struggle with it.
Of course, yes.
Perfect. Yeah, every time I bring up the microscope to identify something, I just, okay, I can do that.
You did hire me. I'm looking for a job.
I work for the state, I can't hire anything.
I know.
As a volunteer, you're hired.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking for a microscope, so,
there you go, there you go.
and the correct reagents.
Ooh, that's one thing we're short on. It's a bunch of piecemeal things. Unfortunately. Where am I? So, when we're talking about the different dichotomies, the different being of species, we kind of have in the public and in the scientific community, two choices broadly that we can choose from. We have what's known as a field guide, which are these guys. Okay? Field guides are usually illustrated. They are for quick identification. I bring these out into the field, thus the name, so that way I can have it on me quick and easy. And I'm like, okay, this tree is either a swamp chestnut oak or a chinkapin oak. I forget exactly what they look like. So I can go through here and come up with a quick ID. They're very useful for children events and very useful for a quick and dirty identification. Then we have these. This is a key book for keying out for North Central Texas. On my Christmas list is the East Texas one, but I don't have $200 to spend. It's about the same size. Now, this is one for Texas grasses. These guys can commit murder. They are much more in-depth than field guide. Point being, like we mentioned, to get those fine details difference, to measure things by the millimeter, to determine if it's in a certain range, to say, yes, it's this way, no, it's this way. Okay, this guy goes and for this plant one specifically, if you really have no idea what it is, someone just brings you a plant and they say, oh, I don't remember where I got it. Ideally, you start on page 1. If you follow the yes, nos to your different species, your family, your genres. Yes, excuse me, and then work your way down. So you won't go page 1 to page 2 to page 3, but you may go from page 1, say it's species A, and that leads you to page 24. And then 24, you work your way down to page 274, and then further and further. Whenever I have to key out a plant, I definitely, because I'm not, I do not, plants are not my strong suit. I set aside a date because most of the time I err on the side of being a perfectionist, so I don't like any uncertainty in my decision. So if I'm like, ooh, I measured this, but I said 6 millimeters, but I think my measure slid a little bit. So let me remeasure that. It takes me a little bit longer than others, admittedly, but at the same time, it's not a quick process for anyone but a professional that keys out plants in the right. So, a little fun activity for you. Create a simple key between these 4 different organisms. A little sheet of paper right now. Go ahead. And then let's see what you've come up with. Now remember, they can be, they're intentionally meant to be simple. So an example is fictional real. Okay. Bipedal, quadrupedal. Clothing, no clothing. Just let your imagination run wild.
What's that guy's name on that side?
The cricket or Mickey Mouse?
The animal.
The bighorn sheep. That's my fault. I heard you say guy, and I was thinking, I don't know what cricket is. It's a guy or a girl. I think it was implied it was a guy in Mulan, but I'm not sure. But I believe that is a Rocky Mountain bighorn, not a desert bighorn, but that's one of those things. It's a different subspecies. And I honestly don't know what the differentiating factor between those subspecies are. I'm pretty sure it's geography, but whenever someone has an example they'd like to share, what you got?
So I have half horns, yes, for bighorn sheep, no leads to the clothing,
Okay,
yes. Or I'll do no leads to the cricket, yes leads to the question male, and then I have yes, Mickey, no Minnie.
there you go. That would work. Yes.
So I have living or real versus animated, and I have representing furred animal.
Mhm. Between Mickey and Minnie. Otherwise, it gets kind of hard for Mickey and Minnie.
I mean, you can always go bow, no bow. but-
You could. Eyelashes, that's another good one. Anyone else want to share? What you got?
Real, bighorn sheep, and fiction, animal or insect,
Mhm.
insect, the cricket, the animal, mouse, down male, female.
Okay, I like it. I like it. So now let's try a little bit harder. Can you split these four apart? It is a North American opossum, a mountain lion, a raccoon, and a sea lion. This time someone different who didn't volunteer earlier. So if I'm looking at this, the first split off for me is mammal marsupial. The second split off is terrestrial aquatic. So how would you split between the last two?
We're gonna switch on the screen. This is flipping is driving us crazy.
Well, they're both considered nocturnal, but can be active during both times of the day. If you said a total phone, I could accept that. It's not official opposable phone, but it's close enough for this demonstration.
Retractable claws.
That could be one, retractable claws. Size of canines, you could say canines over an inch. So a possum was split out earlier. We're talking about between the mountain lion and the raccoon, the two middle ones. So raccoons are pretty omnivorous. They're very opportunistic. A mountain lion is opportunistic too, but it's much more predatory. So you could do a colored tail, so stripes on the tail. That's acceptable. You could do color of the coat, so dark coat, light coat. Size of canine, they both have canine sizes. They're both in the order carnivora, so they're both technically, well, that gets complicated. Anyway, that has to do with a lot of skull morphology. to get to it, this is the actual phylogenetic tree of it. So your marsupials will split off first. Carnivorous. And your raccoon is right here. Mountain lions are way up here, close to your canines. So what we're going to do now is, it's a little bit wet. Last year I kind of had a little walking nature tour where we ID'd some plants. So what I would like to do now is ID some more plants. Since I know we have a botanist, I'm gonna give her the harder one of the bunch, but it's only because admittedly, with the time of the year that we're doing this, we're sending you into the master class because everything's dormant. This week, I just started noticing green up, which makes things a lot easier. But IDing plants and trees without leaves is significantly harder than with leaves. So I have one without leaves. And the one without leaves also was prescribed fire last year. So the bark isn't the best representation of the color, but there is 1-2 characteristics about it that make it still unique. So what we have are 4 different groups. So if we can kind of congregate into 4 different groups, and I can give you a key and a set of plants. Go now.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Used to be a good option. I don't think it's big.
Okay, so I'm gonna be recording from my phone.
There's people up. Yeah. It'll all be good.
I'm gonna stay in here. You want me to stay? Just keep an eye on it. Let me know if it's like going crazy on the screen.
I know, that's the key. Oh, look at there. Global classroom. Okay. Who can tell me what this guy is? Acorn? What? Oh, so it's an oak. What other identifying characteristics help you out with it? Leaf shape. What about leaf shape?
Larger population of leaves and the more mature ones are up.
This guy is one of those I was talking about earlier that this one will confuse you more than any other tree. It has 5 different leaf shapes it will throw, especially towards the bottom. So that having multiple leaf shapes on the same tree should be an identifying characteristic. Does anyone know what the tree is? Water oak, correct. If you're from East Texas, you can also call it a pin oak. But it is not a pin oak. It is a water oak. Yeah. I grew up in East Texas. I understand that's sometimes you have colloquial names for things that aren't the actual name. That's where those Latin scientific names are important because they really help you speak the same language, literally. Another thing, yeah. Anything unique for water oak
That unique or
sometimes, not always. So the lichen appears on a lot of different trees, a lot of different oak species. Anecdotally, I have noticed it more on a water oak, but that's not a defining characteristic of a water oak. Now, if you're looking at the bark, the important characteristics are these fissures, how deep they are, how wide they are, the bark plate. So each of these scales and what the scales look like, as well as the color of the bark. So when it comes to IDing trees off of bark, it's a little bit harder, but you can usually get broad categories broken apart. So the tree right behind y'all, what is that?
like a red oak, bro. I mean, you see, it has these things pointy. Yeah, it's just more like a red oak.
Water oak. Versus this younger tree. This water oak has more of the classic water oak leaf shapes when you look up high. That water oak leaf shape is that reverse teardrop. That's a classic water oak leaf shape. But if you notice, it has some with lobes, it has some without lobes, it has some pointed, some rounded. Water oak will try to confuse you as best it can. They can. These are in a more developed area, so they may have been pruned in the past. They may have had some other stressors that have impacted them. The typical growth form of a water oak is that of a classic oak. It's going to be a 50 to 80, 100 foot tall oak that has that broader canopy.
So not like a live oak. When you think of that spreading southern landscape style, that's a live oak. And this is going to be more like, either ovate or some of the oaks are pyramidal in their mature form.
How old are they? It's very hard to tell. You can give a rough generalization, but the key there, it depends on a bunch of different factors. So light, rain, and the availability of that. So, for example, these three live oaks co-dominant with each other.
Water oaks.
If you look at their canopies and how the canopies have kind of shifted to mold to each other's shape, it's telling me they're all co-dominant. That live oak is probably the most dominant of them, but because that one is larger than these two, these may be the same age or within 10 years of that one's age, but because that one's more dominant, it's absorbing more of that light and rain, making these grow slower. So a lot of times, especially in plantations, that's why, and in forest ecology, that's why having a less dense canopy is better. A lot of forest ecology, trees will die out naturally because more dominant trees take over and shade them out.
So is that why the forestry is cutting down
Yeah.
older trees?
It can
That's
be.
what I'm seeing in the
Absolutely. So the important factor is all trees have a lifespan. They're going to grow throughout their life regardless of what we do. And that life could be anywhere from 80 to 100 plus years, depending on the tree. And at the end of that tree's lifespan, it will die, or if it gets shaded out by other trees. So the forest is constantly changing.
But I don't understand, like, why were they cutting down mature trees? Like, and then there are younger trees, they could just cut it down easily, but
So-
cut down mature trees.
Probably for the factor of that the forest is constantly changing, the dynamics and the age classes are changing. And if you take out your older trees that are close to the end of their life cycle, ecologically, they've already done all the work they're going to do. So instead of just letting them die, they're going to get a profit from them to then put back onto the land to manage the land. So it's recycling that money back into the land versus letting the tree die and not having that money to put back in. Pines, it depends on the species of pine. So longleaf pines live longer than loblolly pine, and they're typically a older tree as well. But on average, it depends on the context as well. So in most plantation contexts, they will put a loblolly on the landscape for about 40 to 60 years before it goes into the beginning of the rotation, so another clear cutting. But naturally, a pine may live up to 100, long leaves over 100, 120 or so. So somewhere in that
I was getting
ballpark.
distressed, but now I know it is.
Yeah.
The other thing is when you look at forest management, I come from the Pacific Northwest where clear cutting large swaths of land is very, very common because it's economical. When you're looking at the commercial value of a tree, those larger sizes, I know that you've got 2x4s in your house. I know that some people like their real wood panels, that sort of stuff. Those larger trees have more volume to get those bigger cuts out of. So that's another, if you're looking at commercial uses of forest land, those larger trees have a higher value than the smaller. But management of a forest is very, very dependent upon what the purpose of the forest is. Naturally, in nature, an old tree is going to fall down, and you're not going to take out that tree because it's fallen down, it's rotted, it's called a nurse tree. That's where new babies grow as it's decomposing. So if you go like the redwood forest, stuff like that, you'll see all these giant nurse trees. They have little trees coming out of them. And it's not that they're producing babies from what fell down. It's just that's where the seeds are germinating. It's very rich.
Looks like a vacation area there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that brings up an important point when it comes to forest ecology. Okay, we live in a forested system here in East Texas. Each forest is unique within itself in the forest dynamics, the silviculture of that forest, as well as the ecology of the forest and surrounding areas, the pocket prairies, the wetland habitats, the blackland prairies, the open savannas, everything like that. East Texas specifically is a disturbance-dependent ecosystem. Historically, we're talking about pre-colonization, pre-Indian settlement. East Texas had what's called a historic fire regime. Every 3 to 5 years, we would have the landscape completely burned by wildfire. These trees in East Texas grew up evolutionarily with that. They are adapted for that. So additionally, in East Texas, we have other factors. We have drought, we have hurricane, we have floods. All 4 of those things all play into the ecology of this landscape. So as urban sprawl happens, as cities grow, we remove a lot of those things. We don't have floods as much anymore. We have them, but we control them much better. We don't have wildfires as much anymore. We have hurricanes, but we mitigate impacts of hurricanes with flooding measures. So these trees have started to grow differently than they were historically designed to grow.
Become entitled.
In a way, you could say they become entitled. So within forest management, doing things like thinnings, clear cuttings are reestablishing that disturbance.
It's like fire climax stuff. A lot of these trees, if they're in an area that has naturally or historically had fire, that they have evolved so that a lot of seeds won't germinate unless they're heated. Unless a fire rolls through, you're not going to get seed germination.
Which is a good point for longleaf pine. Longleaf pine, this historic landscape. We're in Houston, we're getting close to the coastal prairie, so this is with an asterisk. It's a little bit different as we get closer to the coast, but East Texas was what's known as a historical pine savanna. So if you're thinking about those words, pine savanna meant it was a mixed yellow pine, so longleaf, shortleaf, loblolly, not really much slash, but those 3 main species in the savanna. So think Lion King, think the Serengeti. grasses, open area because of that constant fire. Now, in your lowlands, in your riparian areas, we had wetland plants, we had oak species, we had hardwood species and shrubs, and then we had edge, which was a transition between. But East Texas did not look like this historically. It was much more open, much less dense in terms of your basal area of tree, much more light penetration to the ground, and a lot more native grasses. So by re-implementing and keeping disturbance in the system, we're trying to keep the system back to that historical.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I curiously touched that poison ivy that's fine, actually. Is that enough to be, am I gonna get you from?
It's a great question. I would wash your hands just in
Probably should
case,
wash your hands.
but you can get a knife and scratch the vine, and if it's brown underneath, then it's dead. But depending on your tolerance to the uracil, you might still need to wash your hands and do stuff.
I gave it a wash.
Yeah.
I gave it a wash. But
I mean,
it's a curiosity touch.
it's so like I'm pretty allergic to poison ivy. So if I touch recently dead poison ivy, I'll still break out. But if I touch really dead poison ivy, I won't.
Okay, that one was like a pretty crumbly.
Okay, then you might be fine.
There was a question on Zoom about the oak leaves, if it was because of hybridization. It was from
Yeah, me
Tom.
too. Okay.
What about
About the difference in the shape of the oak leaf.
Is the variation of the leaf shape caused by hybridization or a natural feature of the water oak?
that's a fantastic question. I'm not really sure. To be honest with you. Do you know?
So,
I mean,
oaks are a little promiscuous. Um,
yeah.
okay, so in the botanical sense, that means that they don't necessarily stick to their species in terms of being able to cross-pollinate and produce viable seed. So if you have a water oak that may have accidentally crossed with something else because it is promiscuous, then you may end up seeing different leaf shapes in different places. But diagnostically, that kind of looking like a three-toed foot is very water oak-esque. So not used to blackjack, so hey, something you're gonna have to show.
Yeah, absolutely. Blackjack is much more. Its feet really like to be wet, whereas water oak they prefer wet, but they can do also more drier sites. But blackjack, the key characteristic is the leaf looks like a duck's foot.
Yeah.
Very, very much. It's wide. It can be longer, but it's a large leaf, and it has those three toes on the top.
So not all species of plants are promiscuous. Not all groups, but some groups are a little more promiscuous than others. So you look at things like orchids, and they're not out in nature particularly promiscuous because they have a lot of mechanisms to keep out that type of very broad outcrossing from happening, but man has intervened, so now we're even getting intergeneric crossings and things like orchids. But there's some plants that their flowers are designed to be self-birds. There's ones that are designed either chemically or mechanically to promote outcrossing. So, and some of them will only do their own species very strictly, and other ones, Louisiana iris is a great one. It's promiscuous. You'll see all sorts of Louisiana iris and a gazillion different species of Louisiana iris. And it's just in part because they're promiscuous. Very classic botanical study on Louisiana iris.
Questions?
Question. The change that we've done to the
Would be considered
You're-
a climax community in this area?
So let's back up and look at that very general. Texas is, depending on what source you look at, 93 to 97% privately owned. The vast majority of ecosystem management is done by the private landowner. As such, some of our best examples of climax communities, of pristine habitat, are those private landowners. Because government agencies, they have the ability and the expertise to do things, but a lot of times they don't have the appropriation of funds. So if they do have the funds, they may not have the ability to use those funds in such a way. Additionally, we have to take in consideration of every interested party. So in North America, we utilize the North American model of wildlife conservation. What that means, I don't know if y'all been over that yet or not, but what that means is you and you and you own every wildlife in the continental U.S. as much as I do. It is owned by every U.S. citizen and managed in public trust by the state agencies. Because how can we manage white-tailed deer in Houston the same as white-tailed deer in Amarillo? You can't as a private individual, but we can as the state because we have jurisdiction over both. So we are managing it for you. There is no private ownership of wildlife in the United States in North America. Because of that, North America and Africa utilize the same model. We have both had a decline in extinct species since the implementation of the model, and incline of species diversity and abundance because of that model. It is a fantastic model to use. It is a great resource because it gives you a stake in the conversation. So as such, we have to take in every possible attribute into managing that resource. Now, the reason why private landowners are able to do it is because they don't necessarily. We manage the landscape for the wildlife, for the landscape ecological impact. The private landowner manages their land for the wildlife impact. So they may be able to do things quicker, more efficiently than we could due to red tape or availability of resources. So to answer your question, it's a very long-winded answer, but to answer your question, the best example are on some of our private lands because we have some amazing stewards that are wanting to do right, wanting to put their money where their mouth is, and wanting to make sure that these resources are not only there for them, their kids, but for many, many generations to come. So I didn't give you a specific answer because there's legality involved, but there are places with a little digging you might be able to find some. Yes.
Branches that would bring in exotic breeds or
That is a very complicated question. There is some governments over how and what, but that's where it kind of gets into the splitting hairs on the governmental side into exotic animals are handled by the Texas Department of Agriculture, not Texas Parks and Wildlife, because they are treated as livestock and not wildlife. Correct. Correct. So it's a different jurisdiction over that. So it's a complicated question, a complicated answer. At the end of the day, the department, Texas Parks and Wildlife, we promote natives, discourage non-natives, and promote good ecological and environmental conservation through the use of resource and land and wildlife management. Maybe I answered it, maybe I didn't. Very politician answer. Yes.
To detect fire.
Absolutely. And it's a prescribed fire is the most money efficient tool to use. And if you have the resources, the easiest impact. And it gives you the best impact for what you've done. Within the state, prescribed fire is used in different ways, but the entire state, well, 99.99% of the state was historically burned in some form or shape. The burn regime may look different. So in the Trans-Pecos, in the desert, those fires could be anywhere from every 10 to 20 years. East Texas, where we have a lot of water, so plants grow quick. In some areas, it could be every other year. So it looks different in different parts of the state. And we have programs, and the national partners, the USDA, NRCS has programs that help cost share some of those things. But then additionally, there are prescribed burn associations in the state, which is a fantastic resource because what they do is they are landowner helping landowner. So let's say you have 10 acres and you have 10 acres and you have a tractor, but you have a four-wheeler, and y'all get together and you help each other burn each other's property. And a lot of times the other resource that we have are private contractors. But private contractors, if you look at prescribed fire, we have 365 days a year of good burn weather. So burn weather that fits very, very specific parameters. There may be 20 days a year you burn. So a private contractor is making their living on 20 days a year. So they have to prioritize properties that they can get the best value from. So if you have 10 acres, 20 acres, some small piece of land like that, even for private contractors up to 300 acres, you may not be prioritized. So those burn associations help people help each other out. And then you help out neighbors, and it reduces the risk of wildfire. It helps promote species diversity and ecology, and a ton of our other benefits from there.
Time for one question and then we can go
Okay.
take a break. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, does everybody know what a prescribed burn is?
Anyone else?
I was gonna say, there's really a huge importance for prescribed burns in managing wildlife. Many years ago, when I was back in the Northwest, I worked for, it was a group, Oregon State University, Department of Forestry, Department of Wildlife, and Tule Lake National Wildlife Refuge. Parks wasn't in it, but there is a National Wildlife Refuge, which is kept very hush hush in Oregon. It houses 500 or more bald eagles a night in about a 1 mile square area. It's just a natural roost, and I went in and worked on. We were in there in the summer. We were looking at roost trees. We were looking at damaged trees. There was a lot of bark beetle damage. They needed to go in and do a prescribed burn. Pacific Northwest has lightning strikes in the summer when it's dry, and a lightning strike light up the forest and nothing flat. And I don't know if y'all know about Pacific Northwest fires, but they can get way out of hand. So to preserve this roost area, this winter roost, they're going in and doing all the biological work first, mapping where the roost trees were, looking at what was on the ground, looking at the small trees, so that they could go in and torch it, so that they could save that as a roost. And the wildlife sanctuary is called Bear Valley National Wildlife Refuge. But like I said, it's not one that is, you think about, like you think about Yosemite, because they try to keep it on the down low because it's such an important roost.
Well, I'll hop on my soapbox one moment. I always feel obligated to tell people this when given the opportunity. But I'm a resource here for you. I'm here to help you with everything. But being a private landowner, and you don't have to have hundreds of thousands, hundreds, or even 1 acre to be a private landowner. You can have a 1/4 acre lot and be a private landowner. But what's important is the fact that every decision you make is a management decision, including the decision to do nothing. And you must be willing to accept whatever comes from that management decision. So being conscious about the things we do, the things we choose to put in, and what we choose to promote is important. Because at the end of the day, a deer's home range can go up to 1,000 acres. But if one neighborhood comes together and chooses to do the right thing, you can make a measurable impact. So what's important here is the ability to come together and create meaningful change through uniformity and consensus. Cool. Appreciate y'all.
Question, I've got a couple stuff.
I will switch over to the main camera here in just a few minutes. We'll probably take a break first.
Volunteer. I know. I have the team of master naturalists that do education and outreach for the Huntsville Bat Colony. I don't know if you know much about that, but I'm the one helping with that decision. And I need more volunteers for my bat team to do education and outreach. So if anyone is interested, contact me and I would love to talk with you and try to get you on.
Once we're done with this one right here.
Once you're certified. That is the barrier of entry. You must be a certified Texas Master Naturalist. Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We are about ready to get started. Thanks again, Preston. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is everybody back from break and settled in? Our second presenter today is actually a member of the Heartwood chapter, and he has been for 12 years, I believe, class of 2012. And this is John Stacy. He's going to be talking to you about wetland ecology. And he has lots of hands-on experience because he leads and is very involved in the East Texas Trailblazers, the people volunteer here today. John Stacy, thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. So, the interesting thing about teaching some master naturalist classes is we're gonna have somebody in here who's got a PhD in whatever I'm about to talk about. We're gonna have another person who just came from the Bronx and doesn't even drive a car. So we've got this huge disparity. So somebody's gonna listen to what I say and they're gonna say, that's bullshit. And somebody else is gonna hear what I say, and go, wow, that's amazing. So we're gonna try and just average it out. Okay? As far as the state goes, we're covering in your lovely book, Unit 19, which is wetlands ecology. So if I make this thing work, what's a wetland? These are the things that I'm expected to teach you today. What wetlands specifically are found in Texas as opposed to coastal Carolina or Newfoundland or wherever else. You probably have a base knowledge already, or you have some opinions about the next 2 or 3 things. But we're going to kind of explore a little more data that will tell you what value they have, why you should care. There's 3 people in your class that work with me and I work with them trying to save wetlands. I'm happy to talk to you about that afterwards or breaks. But what are we up against? What's the fate in the future? Let's see. But before we can talk about wetlands, and this is the other part, I'm now going to be stepping on some things that some of your subsequent units are on. You're going to get some geologists that are going to want to talk to you about, drill down, but you can't understand the wetland unless you have some grasp of the hydrology or the geology. And one of the cool things to me about being a master naturalist was not that I learned any subject matter. It was, I had these aha moments when I realized, oh, it all clicks together. Why is a magnolia leaf big and fat? Why is the magnolia flower big and fat? Plants ain't stupid. There's a reason. Nobody knows. I've never got away with the class without somebody.
It's one of the oldest flowering plants.
It's about 65 million years old, which is about 2 million years older than what you think of as pollinators. Moths, butterflies. The only things that pollinated it or beetles and rough flies. They would just tear the babies out of a little fall. So everything is sort of connected, and everything has a reason if you get excited and start looking. So hydrology may be hard to see. These are the major waterways in Texas. And you've probably never thought about it if you're from Texas, and if you're not from Texas, you probably don't care. And what strikes you about this? What jumps out at you?
Feeding over to the.
Hint. They're all going from the northwest to the southeast. Every one of them, even way up the Red River, and it hooks back around. This is just nice. So, how come? The geology. You can't really read the fine print, but okay, how many geologists do we have in here? I knew it. You want to excuse yourself for about 5 minutes. Over the millennia, fire, the ocean Gulf recedes, leaving all this vegetation, and it comes in and it kills it. That had two consequences for Texas. One is over time, that made the Gulf Coast incredibly rich source of hydrocarbons, coal. Not many of you know, Texas is a big coal state. The other thing that happened, and we'll talk about this later in the specific wetland, salt. Salt geologically would be brought up, and it created dense layers. So underneath the surface of the land, you have these layers, impermeable layers of salt. As the earth shifted, those would crack, distort the soil, and create pockets where what got trapped? What got trapped in those pockets? Hydrocarbons. Spindle top, drill a hole through the salt into the ground, 100,000 barrels a day is what, right up here. So why Texas became a big oil place, and specifically Houston, is because we have these amazing hydrocarbon deposits, which are consequences of the geology. This is where, here in over Louisiana, is where the National Petroleum Reserve is. Because you can drill into the salt dome, flush out the brine, and create these vast cavities of impermeable storage space. So the geology is what's going to make this very different than this. So when we talk about wetlands, specifically in Texas, you got to start by saying, where in Texas? As you go through your class, you're going to keep seeing maps of regional ecoregions. Some maps show 39 ecoregions. Some show 5. The reason they're all different is because it depends on the use that map was designed for. So it gets real easy to go down a rabbit hole when you're trying to say, well, what's specific to this area? Well, what is this area? So we're going to try and keep it simple. We're going to talk about 5 regions. We're going to talk about the west, the south, the central, the east. Just keep it simple. But what kind of wetlands are going to be in them is going to depend on the geology and the hydrology, which includes the climate, the rainfall. So where out West Texas, you might get 6 inches of rain a year. Here we call that Tuesday. So these are the two characteristic wetlands out there in the high plains. Okay? High plains picture just exactly what you're thinking, you know, stagecoaches and stuff like that. But I'm sorry for the quality of the picture. A playa is just a depressional wetland that just gathers whatever rainwater essentially gets. It can hold it. It's a big deal for migratory birds, but they're not permanent. Depending on what's happening, they can dry up and they won't be there. The other thing that you're going to find in that part of the state is this saline land. Think of the Great Salt Lake, in Utah. Okay? Remember, we were just talking about all of this salt left over from all these oceans. The cool thing about saline lakes is that salt and all is actually brought up by water that's coming subsurface. So while they'll hold rain, they're also kind of a consequence of subterranean seepage or pressures. So they're formed very differently. But as you can just see from the backgrounds of these pictures, that's the part of the state we're talking about. So if you talk to someone up in Amarillo about a wetland, they're not going to be thinking about what someone in Long Beach thinks. South Texas, think Victoria and going down Brownsville. Anybody ever drive down Padre Island? I saw you grin. Don't worry, we won't tell. The two characteristics, and I have never learned how to say that word properly, which are an oxbow. But specifically in that part of the country, there are oxbows from the Rio Grande. Interdunal swales, you play in if you ever went to a beach. Okay, there's some interesting things. So here is a illustration of an oxbow. So you see the main channel, but at one point, the channel came here. We have an expression on our trail through, the water always wins. So we're trying to fix a 20-foot bridge that just went out, you know. Water always, all we do is, you know, negotiate with it. Here, the water just decided one day it's going to take a straighter course. And it cut this off. So eventually, what's going to happen to that oxbow? Right now, it's a little lake, nice pond. Look way down here. You can see a few white traces. That's an older oxbow that's now revegetated, filled in. So the river is going to keep doing that. It's going to meander. It's going to start cutting the bank. It starts to make a big bank. And then one day it says, no. Drive to New Orleans. What big bridgey thing do you drive across? The Chapelite. One day, the Mississippi River is just going to say, screw this, and it's going to come right through there to the Gulf. We can build up all the dikes we want, but the river is going to win at some point. All rivers, all streams, and all creeks do that. Interdunal swale. That's just the water that gets stuck on the beach back behind the dunes. You probably never thought of them as a wetland. Some of them are brackish. They've got some fresh water. They might have salt water, but they actually are a very specific habitat. And so there are flora and fauna that are dependent on those types of wetlands. Now, do they shift? Yes. Don't all wetlands shift? Yes. They're not, despite our efforts to make parks and such like that. Why do you think this land was available for a park? As it goes underwater. You know, so everything is moving. West Texas. Way out west with your big hats. Now I'm talking about West Texas. There's really not a way to show you a good picture of a freshwater spring. So this is, it's like a washed out picture of a riparian corridor in West Texas. So if you head out going west, they're dependent on whatever freshwater spring they can get, and they don't get any rainfall to speak of. When you do get a constant source, then you can get a small stream. And as you can see in this one, maybe you can. There's actually some of the typical, we got willows, you might have willow oak, you have birch. So you have the characteristic flora in that riparian corridor. Now that term, riparian corridor, if I can say it properly, is really a critical thing for you to learn today. What that is and why. As you live in this general area, this is something that will be in every conversation that you have about anything related to this. So we'll talk about it a little more in a minute. Gulf Coast, any birders in here? Yeah, okay, you can give me a 4-minute thing on the Boulevard Flats, thank you. You head down to Galveston, go out on the flats, you'll see the tidal flats. That is a wetland. Okay? Again, it has a community of animals that live on it and depend on it. So it's very different than what you just saw in West Texas, obviously. But it's also wetlands. This is really cool. Jeff or Nish may actually know where this is. This is on one of the Bayou Land Conservancy's protected preserves, and then south of Winnie, close to the intercoastal canal. They just go down there and survey places like this. But you look at this and you say, well, that's not much. A bunch of grass sitting in the water. Whoop-de-doo, when am I going to see something cool? That is the second most productive biohabitat of any place on the face of the earth, the exception being the Amazon rainforest. It has a huge biodiverse community. The deal is they're out of your sight. They're down in the mud and in the water and on the reeds, and they are feeding the shrimp, the redfish, washing down, feeding everything. Those birds, they're feeding on stuff that's feeding on the microorganisms. There's a gazillion, the detritus, the vegetation dies. And if you ever tried to walk through this stuff, you take a step and swish, it's up over your boots, and then you take another step, and you're walking in like squishy mud. That actually is full of nematodes, little worms and stuff that everything's going after. So when you see that, it's actually a really cool place. I do recommend sharing see it with that. Just saying. All right, now we're near and dear to your heart. We're going to talk most about this, so frankly, you're better than everybody. So we kind of have here, we have 3 typical wetlands in East Texas. Everybody else only has 2. The first one you may not have seen, you may not have thought of, but as you go towards the coast, you'll see what's called prairie wet. This differs from the marsh you just saw, which by the way, could either be saline, brackish, or freshwater. Here, same deal, but the grasses are different. The growth patterns are different. And in this one little particular picture, up the top of the picture, you see some hardwoods in there. We have moats, which is a little, not M-O-A-T-S, M-O-T-T-E-S, which is basically high ground. It's a place where there's elevation, and therefore you have things like trees that can grow there. So you have this sort of combined environment. So on the one hand, it's a wet environment, and on the other hand, it's sort of what you would think of as forest. So you're going to get a diversity of animals, birds, and that sort of thing in there.
How big is it?
I'd say generally maybe 10%. And as your last instructor just said, the species that you'll find there of plants are going to be rather different. We've got some that do great. That same, diverting from wetlands for a minute, that same pattern is available if you go north towards Dallas. It's just drier. The Blackland Prairie, the Post Oak Prairie. There you had big grasslands, and as your last instructor said, between fire and also buffalo, American bison. They were grasslands, except where you have a waterway where the access was hard. So you had the same sort of deal there, about 90% grass and 10% islands of hardwoods. So this is just a wetter variety. A hardwood bottomland. This is near and dear to my heart. This is where I spend most of my time, places like this. And you can see it's got standing water here, you know, gets filled when there's a flood. It probably has an inlet of some creek. This is actually Offspring Creek. And you can see, even though it's time of the year, you have a mix of hardwoods. And I don't think it's in this picture, but you also typically get tons of loblolly pine. But the pine will be people from other parts of the country think in terms of topography being significant elevation change. They're used to saying, well, we're going to build on the side of a hill. Okay. Here, significant elevation change be like 2 inches. Not a joke. We use LiDAR to try and map out when we're building a trail. Because the difference, if I can lay out a trail that's 2 inches higher than the surrounding land, that's going to mean it's going to be accessible about 3 or 4 more months out of the year. When you're not having to paddle it from top. But so this is very typical of East Texas. And it's very valuable, which means it's got issues. A riparian corridor. That particular picture was taken, about 8 miles from here. So you can see it's got a waterway, and then it's got lovely plants on the bank. I really should have looked a little harder at that picture. I think that far bank that's Chinese Tower, but it makes a pretty picture. So, yeah, have you guys had a Flora class yet? Do you know what Chinese Tower is? Chinese Tower is a plant that's eating American. But riparian corridor. What is a riparian corridor? You have what you see when you go out and look at a creek. There's your water channel. If you turn around and look hard, you'll see looks like there's a little levee or a little berm further out. That's this. Now, this picture obviously isn't from East Texas, if so, it wouldn't keep going up here. But for example, if you go to the nature center here on Riley Fuzzle and you walk down to the creek, you'll realize you kind of had to go over a hump to get down to the creek. That's the secondary flood channel. That's where the water goes when you get a rain event. So every waterway has a main channel, and then it has the flood point. And that's the space before you get to the natural secondary banks. And as your last instructor hinted, there's lots of politics involved. There's lots of money involved in this. So we're gonna have to get you up to speed a little bit on why understanding what a waterway is, because I guarantee you 95% of your neighbors, when you talk about Spring Creek or the San Jacinto, this is what they're thinking about, not this. You can read these and we'll cover them in a little bit, but obviously I think wetlands are important. I hope you do too. They do all these things. When you have a natural river channel or stream channel, it has space for that water, that floodplain. So when you get 9 inches of rain up in northwest of Houston, that water coming down has a place to spread out, disperse. Vegetation slows the velocity of that water. It holds it on the land and it releases it slowly. This is even from an agency in the state of Texas. If you have 30% floodplain in there, you reduce flooding by 80%. This is why some of the enlightened public officials push for building parks and floodplains. And this is why land trusts, by Land Conservancy, try to conserve these, because it's a huge flood control device, among other things. It's one that we wish more public officials would buy into. Erosion. If that water is channelized and it's just coming down like a freight train, it's taking the land, the soil with it. When that sediment goes downstream, it causes a lot of bad things. If you're a private landowner and you have a stock pond, you're really aware of sedimentation. Because you're going to be paying a lot of money to a contractor with a backhoe every 10 years. So it is a fact. Sand mining on the San Jacinto. Go look at Google Earth and look at those sand mines right up to the edge. And all that sand is drained downstream. But we also can, if we have a setback that holds that sedimentation, that can serve to help with the interests of other industrial things. So it's going to recharge groundwater as it's sitting there in its floodplain. A lot of that's going to percolate into the ground. If you have a reasonable sized live oak in your yard or out in medium in your subdivision, that can hold 200 gallons of water a day out of the soil. It's amazing how much water they can take. But by having periodic standing up towards Dallas, an acre can take 250,000 gallons a day percolating in. But I want to be real clear here. We're talking about shallow aquifers. We're not talking about the deep aquifers that people are putting water wells into. Okay? Geologically, once you pump hydrocarbons or water out of an aquifer, typically it starts to collapse. cell of the structure of the rock collapses and you can't ever refill it. Or if you can, it's a process that might take 8,000 years for the water to be down in a deep aquifer. So what we're talking about is shallow ground. Okay? So when you do that, Texas rivers, the bulk of the water that is in Texas rivers comes from water treatment plants. There's an awful lot of our streams and creeks that we bone dry, except municipal water districts are recycling treated water into them. But if you do this, those shallow aquifers can support during the drought months to keep the flow going in some waterways. They also have been proven that that structure is so, remember how I said everything kind of clicks together? There's a lot of streams that are just bone dry. And the minute someone starts doing some remediation to allow some vegetation and all that, that stream comes back to being a flowing stream again. And this is kind of a biggie. In your book, there's actually, this by the way is based loosely off Unit 19. There's an addendum telling a story about a water treatment facility south of Dallas, off the Trinity River. And they created artificial wetlands to treat wastewater coming out of the Dallas area. And it's been a huge success. And so much so that unbelievably, nobody has done the same thing. But the plants take in nutrients, excess nitrogen, that's the killer. You know, everybody runs out and sprinkles True Grow on their lawn, it washes down. If any of y'all get involved in the stream team, where you go out and sample water, nitrogen is a huge issue, and it's runoff mainly. But phosphorus, they can take up to 80–90% of that out of the flow. Whereas if you're just running that same flow over cropland, for example, they're taking out 8%, maybe. So the wetland plants are really efficient at binding up these nutrients. When you have too many nutrients, you're going to be killing off fish, you're going to be killing off things because you're going to get algae blooms. Very common. But when you have, and this is kind of a different topic, when you have a natural waterway, you're going to have trees, you're going to have shade, and the water temperature is going to be kept cooler. And it's going to be kept at the optimum temperature to support the native fish, the native animals. When it's just exposed to the baking sun, the temperature of that water is going to go up. And it might only go up 3 degrees. 3 degrees is a killer for a lot of animals. So it's holding that sediment. It's going down to the river. It's the sand jack. It gets down to the Gulf. You've got to have clean water, sediment-free water for things like shrimp. Any of you ever take on the Boulevard Ferry and look at the dolphins? Periodically, they have a die-off. There's been too much sediment washed down, which can happen from, you know, Hurricane Harvey, a tropical storm Allison, anything like that. But that sediment needs to be filtered out as much as naturally possible. Habitat, again, I'll let the birders talk your ear off about this during the review, but Texas is the key route for the Central Flyway. The United States, North America has 3 main flyways for migratory birds. So we get a huge number of them. And then they head out over the Gulf mainly, and I realize that's a very simplification of it. But we have to have habitat or those birds aren't gonna make it going or coming. It's 1/3 of the endangered species in North America or any wetland. So incredibly diverse. If you like fish, those little shrimps down there are feeding the red drum and they're feeding everything else that you like to eat. So you gotta have this if you're gonna take care of your wildlife. This is not East Texas, this is state of Texas. But sometimes when you try and get into a discussion with someone about how come we shouldn't bulldoze this little patch of stuff there, you have to talk about dollars. Again, this is from the state of Texas, this is not from John. Now, what jumps out at you when you look at this little list? Yeah. Most people, when you think of Texas, you think of outdoor Texas, you think of deer hunting, you think of bass fishing. Bigger than that are all those people going to the coast to look at birds and people. We have, anybody ever go up to Jones Forest?
Yes.
You ever see the woodpeckers there?
Yes.
I've seen 2 tour buses pull in from Intercontinental Airport, unload about 150 German birders who stood there, looked at the woodpeckers, took their picture, got back on the buses and went back to Germany. So we have some incredible stuff here and people are willing to spend money to do it.
So the ecotourism counts for all the birders, anybody that does any hunting outside of that isn't a resident of Texas, they go into our ecotourism.
No, they go there.
Okay, so the ecotourism is separate.
Ecotourism is people that want to go rent a kayak and, go paddle around and look at the flats. They're talking about people who want to go to Big Bend and, climb the mountain and look at the Rio Grande.
So we're only pulling in 3 billion, that's including hunters that live here and the hunters out of state.
Yes.
People would rather come here to kayak. The birding, I get it.
Are you a hunter?
Yes,
Okay.
a baby one.
Well, you know that you have specific things that you want to hunt, whether you're a birder, as in bird hunter. You're gonna head maybe to the hill country if you're a quail hunter. You're gonna have to buy your licenses. You're gonna have to have your permits. You're gonna have to get, your shotgun, your ammunition. That's gonna all be paying taxes, and the state of Texas tracks that very carefully because they're taking a cut of it all. So they know with a fair degree of certainty how many people are birding up in central quail hunting, with mixing my metaphor, in central Texas at any given time. From that, they can extrapolate where those people come from, what kind of motel rooms did they rent, what kind of traffic did that create in the restaurant. I mean, it's really an economics class, but yeah, now, is there going to be some error? Absolutely. But as a statistic, people coming here to do what you call touristy things are significantly more of an economic impact.
So, and I just from the hunter education, we use it as a talking point, that $24 an hour they get for us, teaching hunters lit, doing all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's actually more beneficial for us, for the state to have master naturalists go out and teach. That actually is bringing in more money towards conservation.
You heard the gentleman in the previous class recruited you. You have people like your last guy, like me, who one reason we're doing this is because we're fishing for souls. Okay. But, so it is a big deal. And yeah, that's part of the benefit of being a master naturalist. The reason I got here is I read a book in 2011 and I looking at the bio of the author, he was a master naturalist. I said, what's that? And I Googled. Found it. So. And that found an organization. I don't do well with children. So I don't teach children's classes. The little boys just want to eat the cherry laurel leaves when I tell them it's made of cyanide. I tend not to do well with church groups. I don't know why the hell not. But I like doing my thing. So you have to find your thing, and it could be totally different.
What is forestry? What is forestry?
Harvesting lumber. You drive up 59. First time you get behind a pine truck, you'll know what forestry is. Studies have shown subdivisions that have access to places like this and have a significant higher real estate valuation than those that don't. That's one reason all these subdivisions are popping in the little blue pond, you know? But all of us like to do this, and yes, I do include, you know, people that fish, people that hunt waterfowl. If you don't have wetlands, you don't have that. So what's up? Where are we going? Obviously, conversion to agriculture, pollution, aquifer. I'm going to talk about drainage projects. We've lost 70% of the North American coastal plain. That's national in the United States. So 70% of it is gone. And once it's gone, it does not come back. The coastal prairie, you here, we've only got about 1% of it left. If you want to see some of the last coastal prairie, get out what's left of the Katy Prairie. Go out there and see what they've got and take a tour, because that's what that last gentleman was saying most of Texas looked like. That's where you've got blue stem grass. The early anglers coming here described it as a sea of grass up to the tip of a man riding a horse. And that's what we have. And it's pretty well done. Harris County, we've lost 70% of our freshwater wetlands. And if you like trees, there's just a quick snapshot. We've lost a huge amount of our tree cover. So the land has been changed by us. Now that's not because 21st century humans are bad and evil. One of the things I learned in the Master Naturalist program was there was never a time in North America where the people weren't messing with the landscape. Contrary to you know, the movies, Native Americans regularly set fire to the woods. Cleared out the underbrush, opened up the forest canopy. They could get in and hunt. They had line of sight. Who here has tried to crawl through about a 50-foot patch of southern dewberry? You people are dumb. So if that was what your land was and you could set fire to it and get rid of it and shoot deer that came, it would be more advantageous. So humans have always modified the landscape. The trick is to modify it in a way that we think is appropriate.
We could be wrong.
And we're going to come to that. So I'm going to remind you one more thing here. So we have this channel and we have this flood. This is where you have a convergence of money and politics. The land here doesn't have water on it. Let's bulldoze this and put some slabs down and build a subdivision. And we can make money building and selling houses. And we can be long gone before the next flood when it all goes away. There's a lot of money in getting access to every scrap of land. Sadly, what makes politics go around? Money. So I'm standing there trying to talk a politician into amending the floodplain construction code in Harris County. After I leave the office, the next guy in is a public relations guy for a major builder who's also asking, where do I write the check to your campaign committee? So you're fighting, and our only hope is to get citizens to understand what the values are, so we'll defend it. You have codes that say you can't build in the 100-year floodplain, which does not mean you're going to get one flood every 100 years. That is a gross statistical misunderstanding. Everybody who's been out in any of the creeks or wetlands here has seen the houses being built where they bring in the truckloads of dirt and they get it up to where using a laser measure, they can get it a 1/4 inch above the minimum floodplain. And then they build a house on there and they sell it to somebody from Ohio. So we have this ongoing, and I'm totally aware that there are people with different opinions than mine. They're wrong, but they. So we are always concerned citizens trying to protect and not have people build houses where they shouldn't build houses. If you have a house, you probably have flood insurance and you pay for that. And some of the houses not far from here get flooded every big event. They don't have, even if they get FEMA money, flood insurance, they don't get enough money to buy a new house somewhere else. So they repair the house that just flooded. It floods the next high one. They get the money from the flood insurance, rebuild it again. 3 or 4 cycles of that. And I remind you, you are paying for that. So we don't want people living where the houses are going to go. We want to build parks. We want to just do nature trails. And if they go underwater, big deal. Let's just take to try and stop it. It subsided. And well, here's another master naturalist tip that you want to keep. You probably want to write this in. Ready? Scientific. Water is down here. So when your land sinks, water comes in. And you can go literally see where the subdivision ground. You can do that up here on the Spring Creek. You can see behind timber lakes and where there's slabs. 18 inches since 1950. Now, it's not just rising sea levels. We're sinking our land, subsidence. The reason that subdivision collapsed is because they pumped out so much water from the aquifer and so many liquid hydrocarbons, oil, gas. You pump all this stuff out from underneath you, and the consequences you go down. If you go up to Woodlands High School and you walk in the parking lot when it's not full of cars, you'll see there's a nice 8-inch crack down there. That's one of the 2 major fault lines that run through there. So there are measurements being taken. And it is a fact, despite what some of my friends tell me, that we've got rising sea levels and sinking land. Texas is not known for spending a lot of money. But we've already got 12 billion to try and remediate some of this stuff. This is an important point for your arguments with your father-in-law about this. They say, oh, 6 inches, the sea level is going to rise 6 inches in the next 50 years. Well, damn, I'll be there. 6 inches, what's the big deal? Where if you're in Newfoundland where the coast looks like this, 6 inches goes up here, big deal. If you're on the Gulf Coast where it's like this, 6 inches, you're talking hundreds of miles of land going into water. So rising sea levels is not a common. People read the headline and it says sea levels are supposed to rise. The impacts are going to be drastically different depending on what your geography is. Since 1900, probably before that, I guess, people have attempted to control the water. And the accepted way to do that was you got away as fast as you can from wherever you didn't want it. And you did that by building big ditches to get it down to the main waterway. And then you messed with the main waterway to get it downstream as quick as you can. This is channelization. Okay. So we dredge waterways, we make them nice and straight, and that way they won't slow the water down. The water can just get it out of your subdivision. Oh, hey, we don't want erosion. Let's put concrete on the banks. Any of y'all ever walked down some of the bayous that have, and you notice the big holes behind the collapsing? It don't work. But the reason people did this was not just that they thought that was the right kind of engineering. The people, by God, you're going to do something about this. When they built 99, a subdivision north of Telby Road, in 2920, all of a sudden the subdivision flooded. They're in the high water. Harris County Flood Control, you need to fix this. The solution was they brought in contractors with backhoes and trucks and they dug out Little Cypress Creek. Started turning it into a ditch. Because by God, they were going to get some results for those people. Look what we did. We fixed your problem. And yeah, but people have different interests and they have different educational levels on this topic. That's one of the reasons why I'm working hard to convey some of this to you folks. So you can, the only people who are going to make a difference are regular people. Everybody else has a stake in the game that's more immediate. The people who dug out Little Cypress Creek were actually contractors out of Arkansas that were getting paid millions of dollars. Did they have an interest in having it channelized? I bet they did. They had giant 18-wheelers with 20-foot plywood sides on the trailer. They were just piling foliage and the tree stumps and everything in there. And I got involved and I found out flood control was paying them by the weight that they took out. So how bright a businessman you have to figure out. You know, the more I dig, the more I kill, the more money I make. And again, they're not evil people, but it's hard to sell. We're going to stop the flooding in your neighborhood by leaving all this forested junk up here. I spend a lot of time on Spring Creek and I have neighbors who just want them to run in and dredge that out. So when you do that big fire hose drain, where's the water going? It floods the next guy downstream. Well, my problem, fix my problem. You've got this huge volume velocity. You can go up to a factor of 10, increase the normal flow rates. So you're getting huge flooding downstream, you're getting huge erosion, banks, neighborhoods. Bottom line, when you get all that water dumped that quickly into the Gulf, you're killing off a lot of Gulf marine life. Whereas if you have the slow or diffuse water, it mixes in, becomes more saline, becomes brackish, and the animals are adapted to it. When I say animals, I typically mean fish in this case there. If you have those meanders, the water spreads out, stores it, provides habitat. This is just a picture of what can be done. That's a water treatment plant. They're filtering and treating more water with this man-made wetlands than your typical big wastewater treatment plant that go with most of your subdivision. Is that commercial or is that? It can be public. This one is a public entity. That one I spoke to you about, you can read the story. Actually, you can go online. I think they got a video. That one south of Dallas is a commercial operation that I think had a contractual relationship with the equivalent of the money.
The follow-up question is, with this, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how they decide to put, like, the location of this. Do they pump the water in, or is it via stream?
It's coming from the wastewater discharge sewers. And it's going into this. There's actually, I'm gonna, before you all get out of here, if you're interested, I brought a few books that I think are really outstanding, but they range from, this is the cool introduction to stuff around Houston, which our friend Dan Simpson wrote. If anyone's not seen it, Wild Houston, take a look. It's a great book. If you want to know more about what happened on the coast or what's happening in the Gulf going all the way back to today, I recommend the American Gulf, The Making of America's Sea. It's a great book as well. It's a good, entertaining read. If you want to absolutely geek out because you're an engineer by heart, there's actually associations for the art of restoring wetlands and restoring creeks. I can read about half of this book because the mathematics get totally beyond me. But there's actually hard science. If you go out to Katy Prairie and you can get up to the headwaters of Cypress Creek, you see where they did a restoration and built some artificial meanders. And so there's actually a well-developed set of technologies on how to do this sort of thing, down to how to build the channels, how to build the series. So just like a wastewater treatment plant, in this particular one, everything doesn't happen in this one cell. A certain set of processes take place here. Then the water moves to another cell. It's just like a man-made filtering system. They're refining it to where it's finally clean enough to discharge. And it's just not a bunch of people running around digging a hole, sticking some plants in there. That's not a real effective way. If you can get it, you got to get it online. Probably it's out print. This is a cool book, the Houston Atlas of Biodiversity. It is just really good. It's old, but it's really good. But so there is a different approach. But now we're going to talk about what the last speaker stepped around. I thought you did a very good job on dancing around politics, but I didn't work for the government. So we got some major laws that will impact the people and what they're going to do. And there are things you need to know about. This is not going to be a legal class. We're only going to talk on a couple of things. The biggie is the Clean Water Act. Okay. If someone wants to do something, build, throw a bunch of dirt into the creek to, build it up so they can build a subdivision, or they want to dig out a channel so they can get their 42-foot fishing boat, if it's a navigable waterway, they got to get a permit. Now, what's that mean in reality? If you drive to the end of, I guess it's Rayford Road, it dead ends, the patch of private land before it goes into San Jacinto. There's a big subdivision just before we get there. That some developers with lots of money just came in, cleared, and put up houses. They didn't screw with anything like permits, which it was a wetland, it was draining into a navigable waterway. So they should have applied for Corps of Engineer permits, which EPA is the technical authority on. So if in the critical word in all of this, we're going to talk about it, is navigable waterways. Because the reason, going way back, the federal government got this jurisdiction is because navigable means you can use it for commerce. And if you can do commerce, that's within the powers of the federal government. So you have this federal law that says you can't just go dump stuff into harbors, creeks, and bays. Well, I'm here in Texas. We don't much care about that. So I'll go get a state permit. That's a little deal. State permit. That's what the states were doing. So they put a clause in here that says, yeah, we can only regulate the stuff we have federal control over. Oh, but we can also tell the states that when they do their business, they got to follow the same rules. Kind of a tricky way to do it. But so you got this law, and this is huge. You have the Clean Water Act. You have an old one, Rivers and Harbors. Same deal. And this goes back way back. And it's because we were killing off all the birds. This is back when bird plumage on hats was a huge deal. And there were huge industries on harvesting birds, shipping their plumage to Europe, up east. They realized we were wiping out a lot of these birds. So they said, well, we can't do the navigable, but when you're considering for a permit, now you have to factor in, is that used by a migratory species? So it's just another way to say you gotta kind of follow the rules. The Endangered Species Act, you all pretty much know about it, but it prohibits people from taking protected species. Taking means more than what you think it means. I have a neighbor who is really unhappy because she has vultures who just decide to sit on top of her house. Can geese do that? Just go away. So she wanted to know if she could use a slingshot to chase them off. So the question is a vulture a migratory bird? If it is, no, you can't. They got rights.
Harassing, so even if she didn't hit it, she just kind of scared it, she would still be in violation of the law.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's one reason why people hate Canada geese when they colonize your neighborhood. Go away. And then you have to figure out, are they a migratory group or the group that's taking up permanent residence, and then they're not migratory. It gets to be pretty touchy. Lawyers make a lot of money off this. One that hasn't been, oh, by the way, the only way the Endangered Species Act protects wetlands is if any of those habitats are critical to those protected species. So that's why it has the hook with wetlands. If your habitat has, the golden prairie dog, it's not a wetland, but you can't go tear it up because you run afoul of the Endangered Species Act. This is a pretty cool one. I never heard about it. If you own a farm and you decide you're just gonna take your backhoe and go fill in a wetland, you may be legally able to do that. You're also going to lose access to any federal dollars. Farm support bills, crop insurance bills. You lose a lot of federal money and farmers depend on that. Underwriting loans. So the name is, I didn't make it up, it's called the Swamp Buster. If you choose to do that, you're going to run afoul of the feds. Migratory birds, again, we're always talking about birds. What's cool about this treaty? Bottom line, that treaty is an international treaty signed by the United States, Mexico, Canada, Russia. Yep. So it's not just our Congress that has. Now you turn to Texas. This is going to be a very short list. The Texas agencies that have parks and wildlife, the vast bulk, if you read their charters, is to advise private landowners and assist private landowners. And that makes sense when you figure that almost all the land here is private. But as opposed to sort of the tone of the federal stuff, which is you can't do this, and if you do, Texas is more like, well, gee, we kind of wish you would, but so Texas Parks and Wildlife, if it's a state-owned resource, the few parks we have, they're in charge of that. TCEQ handles permits and, he says, enforcement. Okay. This is the biggie that you should know about as a citizen, and you probably don't. You need to. Texas has a board, which is appointed, that is charged with having a state water plan. And it's supposed to reach out 50 years. And they renew it, revise it periodically. It's up again next year. They have 16 regions, of which you are in one. And the regions all provide their recommended plan. It goes up in the state, and they agree on, and that drives things like building dams, building reservoirs, channelizing. Our regional water board had a public hearing with consultants that had written on the proposal. I went along with a lot of my friends and citizens, and we just threw up all over it. It was 1950s engineering. They were proposing to build 8 dams right here along Spring Creek, Cypress Creek, and 8 sections of channelization, one of which was blow a ditch through the George Mitchell Nature Preserve. I mean, it was straight out of 1950. So every one of the board members there said, well, this is just a consultant's proposal. This, you know, a lot has to happen before it gets second. So what gets sent up is the official proposal, that exact proposal. That's what's in front of the state right now for your region. And it's all 1950 stuff, but it's going to hire lots of contractors, and there's going to be lots of money spent. So you probably want to read that. Go Google it.
How can you stop it?
Politicians, you can stop by communicating, educating your neighbors and friends, and you can occasionally drop an email. We've had at a very local level, we've had county commissioners who got this and tried to use, you know, parks. We've had county commissioners who don't give a damn about how many dollars they can attract. You can affect it on a local level. This isn't just something where you got to email the president. But we've talked about wetlands. Wetlands are defined at the end of the day by only 3 things. Do they have standing water most of the time? is the soil hydric, meaning it's water saturated most of the time, so it has very low oxygen content? And does it have plants that are typically found in well? And at the end of the day, it's gonna be up to the people to decide, what are we gonna do about this? So, I'll be happy to stick around. I have no idea how we're doing on time, because I don't pay attention.
You want to answer some questions?
I'll answer anything anybody wants. Or I'll just hang around. Everybody's glazed over. Okay.
What's your recruitment path for people? Like, what organization are you with?
I got into working with a land trust called Bayou Land Conservancy. I'm not here as their representatives. Understand that. But they are a land trust that works with private landowners and public to put land under a conservation easement. When you put a land into conservation easement, it is permanently protected, not just for the life of the owner, it is permanent. And there are monetary, but private landowners, and I think 158 for one up north, and it was a family that had kids, had the ranch house and had lovely 50 acres of woods. And time came to get it gone, get rid of it. Now the spouse has died. So the last spouse put it under a conservation easement, so that land would be there forever. So we do that. And we can also do that where if you want to keep your hunting rights for your family, you can write that in. If you want to keep the right to build a house, you can, and an envelope. They also work with Harris County, Montgomery County, all on the Spring Creek Nature Trail. They got about 1,500 acres, 1,500 or 15. I don't know. Okay. They protect thousands of acres. They got 72 preserved. It's a great organization. Kind of like, think the Nature Conservancy, but on a small local basis. Bayou Land Conservancy. Yeah.
What's the name of the reserve?
Bayou.
No, your name.
Mine, Bill Smith.
Joe Smith? That's who it is? Doug Stacy.
I've been Googled by too many hot women. I'm sorry.
We live north of Houston, in the Conroe area, and there's a significant, big one on for a while, development. So all the way out towards past Conroe, Willis, Magnolia, Pennsville now, and beyond. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are. I mean, we just have so many people coming to the state, and volumes that, you know, the builders are planning to be looking to build, and politicians are going to be looking to get those tax dollars in here. So I mean, what's your thoughts?
Public pressure to local politicians to provide amenities. So the city of Conroe has a real nice park, I think, off the farm. And we work with the guy who does the trails and stuff there. And if you can get more people pumped up about that, then you can talk to your commissioners and stuff like, hey, the people would really like to have this. If the people never say they want this kind of stuff, they're not gonna get it. So it's, somebody's got to be bold enough to communicate. And that can be through, your homeowners association. You have to educate people.
I just wish the farm owners, and I'm not their shoes, so they're getting offered a lot of money. There's all that farmland has been sold very quickly now, and there's still all this stuff.
There are, once upon a time, I worked for a real estate company, and they kept 3 geographers staff. Because they would project where major highways were going to be, where the arterial roads are gonna be, so they can decide to buy the land at the intersections. I guarantee you the land along 99 sold long for part of the reason that Katy Prairie got sold so quickly is once they put that road in, now your tax assessment is not as farmland. Your tax assessment is as it's developed. And they basically would bring the little lady's doorbell and say, here's $150,000 tax. And they might have a lot of land, rich, they didn't have the cash. Right after that guy with the tax bill rang the doorbell, another guy rings the doorbell and says, I'll give you $160,000 for it. Done. But that's where you have kind of standing verbiage. The more you talk to people, explain why floodlands shouldn't have houses on them, why we want parks. And I know I'm starting to preach here. But it's important. So that's how you do it. No easy bullet. Okay, we don't want that though. Right?
No, actually, I just wanted to bring up another opportunity to get involved. Usually your county or your city or the county will have boards and commissions. And they're desperate for people most of the time. And it's great to have new blood in those groups because sometimes, developers will, encourage people to get on and they will start encouraging or start influencing policy in one direction or another. So look into your county, look into your city, any of the authorities around it, even river authorities, boards and commissions. And members of the public are often invited to take on one of the roles usually there's like a general at-large chamber. But it's a great way to help influence policy and to learn what's happening or what could happen and share it with you. So.
That's exactly what I just tried to say for the last 20 minutes. Good job.
I worked in government for a long time and we were always begging people to join our boards and commissions. And it would be great to have more like this. I feel that it's on municipal and county boards and commissions.
Yeah, sadly, there's not a magic bullet. And it takes work and it takes effort.
So likewise, I worked for the Texas State Legislature, so I don't know about other government agencies, but I would be happy to teach anybody about setting up automatic notifications for Conservancy. So that you don't have to go and dig, like you'll get an email in your inbox about when things change, so that you don't have to go and research a vote that went on at midnight. So not today, but I'm happy to help anybody do that. But
There's
easy
two
setup.
weird things to me in Texas law that impact you. One is the right of capture. And that means if you own a piece of land, you can put a water well and pump as much water out as you want. No limits. The consequence of that is I won't name big giant water companies like Cedar Water and HED buy a lot of land down in the valley. And they put giant water plants there and they're pumping out hundreds of thousands of gallons of water a day, modeling it. So you have someone saying, my fresh spring water, it says here spring water. They're depleting the aquifer. It's crazy. I'll be right back to you. That's one weird thing that where say in Colorado, the state owns the rainwater. So you can't put a rain barrel on your house. Because you're diverting water, otherwise it's going to public good. Another kind of entity or Texas item is
I was gonna say, you can't like pump water from a stream, right? It has to be from aquifer.
well, it has to be from a hole in the ground. You put that pipe down there with perforations in it, the water comes in. You might have a house up by Longview and you put that in and you pump out all the water you can get. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna go down until you hit a shallow reservoir. So it might be 50 feet. Get a guy with a little jacked up rig on the back of about 350. And after that gets depleted, you have to hire a company to come in and drill a deeper hole. Now, what I'm talking about with like the water plants, they're going down to the base deep aquifers. The ones that took 8,000 years to get there. That's the same reason when you fly to San Diego from Houston, and you get over West Texas, you see all those lovely green circles and frogs. You know, pumping out aquifer water to irrigate. So. Anything else? Yeah, man.
You talked about the blue cypress tree. What was a better, in general, what would have been a better approach to channeling that water, moving that water?
If I ever came, when those developments went in there by 99, they would have had to have much more significant retention basins. A retention basin can be made to look like a natural pond. Retention basins are not detention basins. They're two different things. A retention basin is designed to capture that excess water, hold it, and slowly release it. Had they had sufficient retention, you would have not have had that giant whoosh. And essentially what happened in some of the subdivisions with the problem, the water couldn't get out fast enough as quick as it was coming. Now, before 99 and those subdivisions were there with all the concrete, that water wasn't coming out. So it should have been addressed at the source.
The Grand Central along 45, is that a problem?
Yes. If you drive on any piece of dirt in this part of the state and you see palmetto leaves, don't build a house there. Okay? I mean, that's a sure species indicator here in Wet. That used to be Camp Stray, Boy Scout place. Half of it was not developed. It was a wild wetland that flooded all of it. I was looking for a house 4 years ago. That's one of the places that the realtor wanted us to look at. That's that one.
We live in a mud district, mud went well, and I'm wondering, how can you frame the mud and
We're stuck with them. It's a unique structure, municipal utility district. If you are a builder, and you want to go buy a bunch of land, and then you want to develop it. I could have 2 citizens on that land to create a mud district. So I hire my 2 buddies here, go live in a trailer out there for a year, and they're gonna vote to incorporate the bond. Then they're going to vote, have a $1 million or $100 million bond issue for streets and utilities, and they're gonna have a vote. And it's gonna pass. And now you have a mud district with $100 million worth of debt. And the contractor will come in and build the streets and, put in the electric lines and all that. And people buy a house there, and then they'll start paying, and mud district starts paying the bond. They have a weird amount of authority. They can't spend the money on anything other than related to the mud district. So a lot of times it's in little strip parks, and playgrounds and stuff like that. That's because the mud district had so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. They never thought about cutting the water rates. They're not elected in most cases, appointed. So they can really influence you. Some of them are good. I think it's Mud District 10 around Telby. I have a pretty high opinion. Mine is Harris County over by Burroughs Park. I have a very low opinion. Their idea is running bulldozers and dumping concrete riprap. Destroying stuff, but they got the bulldozers, so my God, we're gonna run. So they're very.
we need it, like, could they have done what they did in those subdivisions without a mud? Or is that?
I'll put it this way.
or is that
I
necessary?
think 49 other states. May not be exactly, But at this point, it's so entrenched into the way Texas does business, it's not. You just, again, you just try and get active. Nobody here has ever gone to, they have to publish it in their board meeting. Nobody's ever gone to.
I have.
Yeah, good for you, congratulations.
But they're not mandatory, right? Because you see some of the subdivisions that they advertise online.
They're not mandatory. But the reason almost everyone has it is that that's where the developer gets the money to pave the roads and put in utilities. So it's, in essence, it's self-funding. And when you move into one, all those people who moved into the Barker native reservoir developments. And nobody ever told them they were inside floodplain. All of them went underwater. Their mud district never told them. When you buy a house, I did it 4 years ago, and you get tons of documents that are legally required. One of them shows what might be the hazards around, where there's a natural gas pipeline. And it's typically scanned someone electronically off a crappy old, Xerox copy of a crappy old blue line. And so you can't hardly read it. I'm a geek, so I'm read it, but people buy houses all the time, not going to back up to a cement plant or, a floodway. So it's there, but people have to put the energy. I think they get to go to lunch or something, huh?
No, we've got some things.
Topics there, so thank you so much, John.
Sure.
Okay, I was just gonna show a few things. Some of you have zoomed in, which is okay. We'd really encourage you to show up. As you could see today, there was a lot of activity that you would not have gotten that interaction on Zoom. And, outside, we tried to do what we can, but we really try to encourage physical presence. And if you can't Zoom and you can't come, you can go to the Heartwood. You Google Heartwood YouTube, Heartwood chapter YouTube. And I can send the link out later, but right now we'll get you there. And up here, it has the Heartwood chapter TMN. And you will see that you can subscribe to it if you want. I don't know where the button is, but you can see that we actually went in and edited last week's session 1 and posted it there. So remember, we talked about people were wanting links, and we said, well, go look on the video. Here you can go in, you can look at it, you can, drag it all the way to wherever the link is that was showing, or the talking about writing time and all that stuff. So you can go in and look at that. If you miss a class, you can go in and look at that. I think there's two. You can watch 2 on YouTube to count for your hours. Other than that, you have to be physically present or on the Zoom. And the reason is because the state has some requirements about being able to interact and discuss and ask questions for it to be really count. Otherwise, it's like watching a movie. So that, I just wanted to show you that. Next week, our class is a Zoom in the morning, the first couple hours. And then after that, we're going to do a little geology field trip. It's about 2 hours. We'll send you a link on where it's going to be. We just want to tell you that you should bring water. You should, probably wear a hat, maybe some long pants, some good shoes. We're going to be on Spring Creek, and it can get a little yucky, especially if it's rained. If it's really, really bad, we'll go check it out before and we'll postpone it or something if it's just not able to go through there. But it should be okay. There's probably not a bathroom right where we're going to go from, but there's one people just added their phone and their email and not their physical address. There were a few that did have their physical address. If you change your mind, you don't want that in there, please come and let me know. And I'll distribute it next week, I think.
According to the YouTube,
Mhm.
so how do you get credit for that?
How to what?
How do you get credit?
You will just do your hours and write in the comment section that you watched it on YouTube.
The hours online?
Online, when you do your hours, do the 4 hours as initial training and then put in the comments, watched it on YouTube and what day you watched it. Rebecca, anything else? Oh, yeah.
Do you have any questions? I know there was a lot of information shared last week.
Yeah.
And maybe you've had time to look at the VMS or look at some of the volunteer opportunities or advanced training opportunities. Do y'all have any questions so far? No? Okay.
The only question that Denise and I had was if the project could be on fungi, I would have that answered.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the first person to come up with a new topic too. I love it. I think that's great. So yeah, I'll talk about that. If anybody has a passion that is not on this list that you would love to create some sort of outreach piece about, we're open to that. So far we've heard, so now we've got fungi. We also heard, what was it? Water? What aspect of water?
Just all the opportunities to learn through the water specialist and other.
The water specialist, that's right, yeah. Yeah, so we have a couple new. Discuss your plans for this. Does that sound like an okay idea? Okay, so what we did last time, and maybe this will work, is we just kind of said like, this group here, this group here, this group here, this group here. So I'm gonna do that and then just come to your area. If you want to take your stuff and let your stuff, that's up to you. So over here, we'll do the birds group. And then we'll do bats, mammals, amphibians and reptiles at the end. And you can stand up and move around the birds, not the group. Okay, and then we'll do. Native plants can be in this area. Soils over here. We'll do insects, spiders, pollinators, trees. And then, if the water people want to stand over here and stay here, then the fungi people over in that area.
If you're at a table that she said birds, that doesn't mean you have to do birds. If you want to go do water, go find the water table. If you want to go do fungi, go do the fungi table.
So, water over here and fibers.